Good evening, everyone. President of the Academy of Arts and Sciences, past presidents, vice presidents, and fellows of the Academy, distinguished speakers, students, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of fellows of the Ghana Academy of Arts and Sciences, Ghana's premier learned society, I warmly welcome you all to the third day of this year's three-day public forum. This event is being streamed live on the Academy's Zoom, YouTube, and Facebook platforms. On Monday, we had a very stimulating session on the regulatory framework for political parties and elections in Ghana. Yesterday, we had another exciting session on financing political parties. Today, we are privileged to have two distinguished ladies to speak on another sub-theme of this year's theme, which is Ghana, national elections in Ghana, issues and prospects. And they are going to speak on the inclusion of women in elections in Ghana, in national elections. Let me quickly give you an account of this annual event on the Academy's calendar. Every year, the Academy convenes a three-day public forum to provide an opportunity for academics, policymakers, and others, as well as the general public, deliberate on a topic of national importance. The maiden public forum was held by the Academy in June 1993. This was a collaboration between the Academy and the Frederick Ebert Foundation. It was on the theme, Making Democracy Work in the Fourth Republic. 20 years thereafter, in 2013, the public forum became exclusively an Academy event, organized with support from organizations such as MTN, the Bank of Ghana, UMB, and NPA. Over the years, the forum has been held on different themes, including accountability in governance, genetically modified organisms, waste management, migration and development, sustainable development goals and national development, vaccines, and African continental free trade area. Today, after 3 decades of the Ghana Academy of Arts and Sciences Public Forum, we have returned to the subject of our maiden edition, that is, how to make democracy work in Ghana. Our theme for this year, National Elections in Ghana, Issues and Prospects, is a topical issue, considering, among other things, that we are headed to the polls in a few months. By examining these issues surrounding national elections in Ghana, we can gain a deeper understanding of the challenges and opportunities that lie ahead. I have no doubt that the two distinguished women invited to speak on today's sub-theme, who will be introduced to you shortly, will do justice to their topics and make your time here with us worthwhile. I look forward to listening to their different perspectives and the conversation that will be generated. This year, we are delighted to announce that we have received support from the Bank of Ghana and the National Petroleum Authority, NPA, to organize this event. We thank them very much for their support. It is my pleasure now to introduce to you the chairman for this evening's session. He is Professor Ayee, is the Vice President of the Arts Section of the Ghana Academy of Arts and Sciences. He held the positions of Chair, beg your pardon, the UNESCO United Nations University Leadership Academy Chair in Leadership Studies at the University of Jordan in 2001, and the Emeka Anyaoku Visiting Chair of Commonwealth Studies at the Institute of Commonwealth Studies, University of London in 2013. Professor Ayee was a member of a team of experts that drafted Ghana's National Decentralization Policy Framework and Action Plan from 2015 to 2019, and the National Decentralization Policy and Strategy from 2020 to 2024. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our chairman, Professor Atsu Ayee. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Honorary Secretary, for the introduction. President of the Ghana Academy of Arts and Sciences, past presidents, vice presidents, fellows of the Academy, our distinguished speakers, my dear students, it's a long time I've seen political science students, so you are welcome. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Today is day 3 of the public forum of the Ghana Academy of Arts and Sciences. And we are talking about national elections. This is a topic which should concern all of us because elections can make the discussion, the questions and the answer segment. So I'll first read the profile of Dr. Maame Adwoa Gyekye-Jandoh. She is senior lecturer in advanced comparative politics. Her expertise lies in comparative politics with specialization in African and Ghanaian politics, the role of civil society in a democracy, civil society-state relations, democratization, gender and politics, migration, citizenship, and belonging, and the politics of the developing world. She was a postdoctoral fellow at the Amsterdam School for Social Science Research from January 2009 to December 2012 under the ASSR NWO program, Citizenship, National Canons, and the issue of cultural diversity. The Netherlands in Comparative Perspective, and an APSA African Workshop project, and the Melinda Gates Foundation, and the National Research Foundation, South Africa. Between August 20 of public policy making in Ghana and obstacles to women's participation in politics in Ghana and Africa. She has published in several journals. They are mentioned in the brochure. Our second speaker is Mrs. Sheila Nyantechiwa Minkah-Premo Esquire. She is a senior lawyer, development consultant, and human rights activist. She holds a law degree from the University of Ghana, Legon, and was called to the Ghanaian bar in 1989. She also holds a master's in law, LLM, from the Georgetown University Law Center, Washington, D.C., in the United States, where she specialized in human rights law. She is the managing consultant of ALC Law Consults, a law firm in Accra that provides legal services in civil law, including corporate, land, family, and mining law, and has several clients. I believe none of her clients is here this evening, but I hope so. She is also a development consultant and has been involved in several researches and the preparation of a number of policies, including the following: family law coordinator for the GTZ Legal Pluralism and Gender Project, among others. She is currently on the following boards and councils: National Executive Council of the Ghana Bar Association, National Information Technology Authority, Rockshore International Limited,
Prof. Chair, President and Vice Presidents of the Academy, Honorable Fellows of the Academy, Honorary Secretary, my colleague speaker, members of academia, and faculty of the University of Ghana. I see Department of Political Science here, the head of Department of Political Science, and faculty at the University of Ghana. Thank you so much for that kind introduction. I would also like to thank the Academy for inviting me to share my views and research on this august platform. I'm very honored to be here. Thank you very much once again. My lecture for this evening is on the topic women representation in national elections. How far have we gone, and what more needs to be done? One would agree with me that this is a very important topic, a topic that sometimes we shy away from in Ghana. The problem of low representation of women has been ostensibly perennial. Between 1957 and 2017, the number of women representatives in Ghana's parliaments has ranged from 10 in 1960 to 37 in 2017. The current 40 MPs represent a paltry 14.5% of the 275 MP total, which is a far cry from the Beijing Platform for Action's 30% threshold for women. According to Shvedoba, Nadezhda Shvedoba, in 2005, and I quote, "The exclusion of women from decision-making bodies limits the possibility." Move on to the concept of representation and understanding women's representation. Hannah Pitkin, 1967, in her seminal work, The Concept of Representations, they are seen as symbols of what other women and girls can do. Though this lecture appears to focus more on formal and descriptive representation of women in elections at the national level, it contends that the four dimensions are inextricably linked and mutually reinforcing. One can therefore view women representation in national elections not only in terms of the legal and institutional framework, but that are active positions, but also in terms of the responsiveness of women representatives to women interests, as well as feelings of being fairly represented on the part of the represented. Further, the Beijing Declaration recommended a minimum threshold of at least 30%, and sorry, I should mention that the Beijing Declaration was and Platform for Action was in 1995, adopted at the 4th UN World Conference in Beijing, China. And this recommended, they recommended a minimum threshold of at least 30% of all public leadership positions for women. It also called on countries to rethink and review and adopt the electoral system that encourages political parties to integrate women in elections. And that is very, very important and interesting that they thought of the electoral system also at that time, the type of electoral system. The MDG 3, SDG 5, interestingly, we have Africa's Agenda 2063, also envisaging an African continent that has full gender parity, with women occupying 30%, but 50% of elected public offices at all levels. We also have the Solemn Declaration on Gender Equality in Africa, and the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, also calling for 50-50 representation of men and women in positions of power. So this is really ambitious, isn't it? But this is the case. And in Ghana, recall that at least in our elected governing body, the parliament, we are not even 20%, 14.5%. Using a baseline of 1995 to correspond to the, let's see what the case of Ghana has for us. Ghana has made some efforts to internalize these international conventions that I've briefly gone through. And the key principles on gender equality captured in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the CEDAW, and other international instruments served as the basis for different provisions in the 1992 Constitution, the relevant provisions on gender equality in our current Constitution. And so we have Article 17(1) of the Constitution guaranteeing the equality of all persons before the law. And Article 17.2 prohibits discrimination on grounds of gender, race, color, ethnic origin, religion, creed, or social and economic status. In recognition of the need for affirmative action, Article 17.4 also states that nothing in that article shall prevent Parliament from enacting laws that are necessary to, among others, guarantee 30% representation of men and women in all public institutions, but this has still not been implemented. And now, I think you will all agree with me that even this 30% is conservative. It's a conservative percentage if you compare to the current call for 50-50 parity or 50-50 representation. So now I will dovetail into looking specifically, just giving us kind of a historical trajectory of women representation in elections, and then we get into the obstacles and the recommendations. So Ghana is yet to elect a woman as president or even as vice president. It is important to note, however, that a number of women have variously contested as presidential candidates or as vice presidential candidates with the male presidential candidates. In 2020, for example, 3 women stood on the tickets of their political parties as flag bearers to be voted for to become presidents. Mrs. Gyekye-Jandoh of the Ghana Freedom Party, Madam Bridget Jobenuku of the Progressive People's Party, and the former First Lady, Nana Kunedu Ajiman Rawlings of the National Democratic Party. All 3 candidates, however, did not perform well in the election, obtaining only 0.14% of the total votes cast. The country has also had a number of female presidential running mates since the inception of the Fourth Republic. Notably, Professor Jane Nana Opoku-Agyeman became the first woman in the history of Ghana to be appointed as a vice presidential candidate by a major political party in Ghana, the National Democratic Congress, in 2020. The party has maintained her again as the running mate for the 2024 polls. Now, we have other running mates, but they have come from the minor parties, the smaller parties. The PPP in 2016-2012, the CPP, Convention People's Party, People's National Convention, Democratic Freedom Party, and Great Consolidated People's Party have also historically selected female running mates under the long time for us to get a woman president or woman vice president. Then I want to just quickly look at women in parliamentary elections. Just give us a little rundown, 1951 to 1979. So that's from right before independence. I know our students know when we had independence, right? Yeah, okay. So right before independence in 1957, we had some parliamentary elections. So from table 1 above, as you can see up there, the following can be observed. There was no female contestant. This number included 9 of the 10 special regional representatives who represented specific constituencies. The 1969 election saw 10 female contestants from 4 political parties: the National Alliance of Liberals, the All People's Republican Party, the Progress Party, the People's Action Party, and 2 independent candidates. Sadly, only 1 emerged victorious on the ticket of the National Alliance of Liberals, but 5 came in second place. A 1970 by-election in Chiana Paga, a close female relative of disqualified PP Progress Party incumbent emerging as winner. Slow increase in the number of contestants in parliamentary elections, and women contestants. So from table 2 above, the following can be observed. The boycott of the 1992 parliamentary election by 4 losing parties, NPP, PNC, New Independence Party, NIP, and People's Heritage Party, in the presidential contest, took 25 women out of the contest because there was a boycott. The NIP female candidate, however, contested as an independent candidate and won. In the long run, 30 females contested the 1992 parliamentary election, with 16 emerging victorious. 10 contests. Let me skip to 2000. We find that the number of female contestants jumped from 58 in 1996 to 96 in 2000. 18 women were elected. There were 24 women runners-up and 54 female also ran. So you see that women actually do well. The few that contest and do well, and if they are helped, they will do better. So the women, I argue they are quite resilient. Not many of them contest, but now the steady increase in the number of female, the steady increase in the number of female contestants in parliamentary elections from only 30 in 1992 to override constitutional and legislative help, the numbers of women contestants and eventual winners would increase exponentially. Of the 40 female MPs in the current 8th Parliament, it would interest you to know that 12 are serving their 3rd terms and another 12 their 2nd term. So that's about how many years, students? Their 3rd terms, 12 years, and some their 2nd term, 8 years. So women are resilient and can do it when given the opportunity. Now, a quick look at women representation in national elections in comparative perspective. The global average share of women in parliament as of January 1st, 2024, stands at 26.9%, with Rwanda 61.3%, Rwanda leading the pack. The share of women in parliaments across sub-Saharan Africa stood at 27.3% as of January 2024, according to the Interparliamentary Union. This was a 0.8 percentage point increase from 12 months prior. All parliamentary elections that were held in 2023, elections in 13 countries for 18 chambers, had an average of 19.1%, constituted an average of 19.1%, of those elected across the sub-Saharan Africa region. The highest shares of women elected to parliament in 2023 were recorded in the upper chambers of Put that against the 50-50, and you see how far Nigeria is, how far back it is, and Ghana as well. Following the enactment of, I think this is very instructive and very interesting, that following the enactment of a Gender Equality and Women's Empowerment Act in Sierra Leone in 2023, which introduced a mandatory 30% quota for women among election candidates, the country produced 41 women. Think about all that. It even prevents them. They constitute high entry barriers to women seeking to even run in elections. Nadezhda Shvedova, in her work titled Obstacles to Women's Participation in Parliament, provides a framework for understanding corruption, there's violence, politics of insults, insecurity. You don't know when you'll be met and beaten up and so on, insulted, called a prostitute, and so on. Gender stereotyping, cultural patterns, predetermined roles assigned to women and men. All these constitute ideological and psychological obstacles to women. And then even the media's portrayal of women in the mass media the media does not do a very good job of covering women's issues and their political activities. Almost all societies across the world are dominated by an ideology of a woman's place. Women are therefore explain the poor representation of women in Ghana. She highlights the position of women in the larger society, how societal values and perceptions denigrate women as incapable of managing their resources as well as engaging in the political field. She also details how public policies have failed to address issues of the poor representation of women. And here public policies including the lack of gender quotas. Other major obstacles to the representation of women in national elections include the high cost of politics, the politics of insults, the absence of legislative gender-based quotas, the type and nature of electoral system. The first past the post system, we must note, which is the single-member district system used in Ghana, is strong on accountability, but weak on the inclusion of marginalized groups, including women, whereas the PR electoral system, proportional towards gender parity. So the first recommendation is affirmative action. And affirmative action, and I like Awusi and Al's, Awusi et al., I think it's Awusi, Adai, and Kwapong in 2023, found that it would be a great boost to women representation in Ghana, where affirmative action policies aimed at Chikata 2009, that's a good job, Georgie Chikata. She says that affirmative action encompasses a set of measures adopted by they're calling for Agenda 2063 is calling for 50-50. I am arguing, let's start slow, 30%. We are now at 14.5%. This will ensure that a critical mass or critical minority of women begin to make a difference for women's interests, needs, and priorities, as demanded in the various international treaties and conventions. However, quotas alone do not remove all barriers to women in politics, as one cannot deal with the problem of female representation by a quota system alone. So the educational system, the political parties themselves, NGOs, trade unions, all must take responsibility to systematically promote women's participation. Further, at the nomination process during the primaries. Now, we've all heard of voluntary party quotas, but this is voluntary. And given our history, you saw the history, given our history, voluntary party quotas, will they work? They may not work because the parties, it's voluntary. They will not be compelled to do that. And therefore, I'm calling for a combination of constitutional gender quotas and legal candidate quotas, which would make it more difficult for parties not to follow the rule to nominate and elect a percentage of women in national elections. Okay, it is not enough to make rules, though, that create a gender quota. We must have systems in place to ensure that the quota is actually implemented. In this vein, there is a need to create a separate, independent implementing agency, such as a Gender Equality Commission, to plan, monitor, and implement all the policies and activities related to the provisions of the Affirmative Action Bill when passed, and to ensure compliance in achieving the quotas mandated by the Constitution in practice. And she is very, I think it's Madam Patricia Piaget, if I'm right, she's very optimistic that the Affirmative Action Bill will this time be passed by the end of July 2024. I was browsing through the current bill, which was revised in September 2023, the Affirmative Action Bill. And they are talking about having a Gender Equality Committee. So I wrote this before I even read through that, and I'm saying, well, we are in sync. So Gender Equality Commission to plan, monitor, and implement all the policies and activities. And then this proposed Gender Equality Commission must be given the needed budgetary allocation so that it can actually do its work to enforce and implement the constitutional and legislative provisions that would come. And in all this, women must also lead the process. Women must also lead the process. Sorry, I think you can't see that on the slide. But women must also lead the process, as indeed women's networks did in Ghana, together Women's Manifesto, crafted and released in 2004, and the Domestic Violence Act passed in 2007. Women must organize and mobilize their networks to get this also done. And they must learn to communicate their interests with their male counterparts and different organizations. And then a further recommendation has to do with political parties and funding. As has been mentioned earlier, the cost of contesting elections has been a major cause of women's underrepresentation in elections across the world and also in Ghana. We have several scholars citing this problem, including Murray et al. 2023, Awusi et al. 2023, Bawa and Dakwa 2021. And there have been filing fees in Ghana, right? Discounting filing fees, okay. In her work on, and this is particularly important for me, in her work on exploring suitable electoral systems for promotion of women's representation in Tanzania and Rwanda, Lihiru 2022 shows how Rwanda's adoption of the PR system for its lower house of deputies, along with the 2003 constitutionally created 30% quota for women in all decision-making bodies, as well as the 24 reserved seats for women in Rwanda's Senate, has led to its status as a global leader in women's representation, despite the lack of a gender quota in the nomination of candidates and no specific positioning of women in the candidate lists of political parties. So the PR system helped Rwanda, and then it also added the quotas. In contrast, Tanzania's use of the first-past-the-post system with no gender quotas for candidate nominations has resulted in a lot. Maybe I'm too optimistic, but that is the case. So, and then finally, of course, we can't talk about violence. The violence against women must be stopped. Women must be provided security when running for elections. We have to have cross-country learning platforms to learn from other countries that have done this, and then have various mentorship programs to help provide women with valuable guidance, support, and access to resources. So in conclusion, I just want to reiterate what I have done, I guess, to shed light on the historical trajectories of women representation. And I argue that there's the need for bold steps with regard to affirmative action policies, gendered electoral financing, building inclusive political party structures, education and training, as well as the resocialization of society, if Ghana is to make progress from its current position. There's also the need for a review of the 1992 Constitution, of course, in line with what I mentioned earlier. Finally, by ensuring that women's voices are heard, their perspectives are valued, and their leadership recognized, we can cure the dilemma of democracy, or this dilemma of democracy, which is supposed to be participatory, but has few women in it at the higher levels, and create a more representative and inclusive democracy that benefits society, Ghanaian society as a whole. Long live Ghana, long live the Ghanaian people, better days for women representation. Thank you very much for your attention.
Our second speaker is Mrs. Sheila Minkah-Premo. Her topic is Civil Society and Women Inclusiveness in National Elections, a comparative perspective and lessons.
Thank you very much, Prof. Chair. The President, Vice President, past presidents of the Academy, Honorable Fellows, the Honorary Secretary, fellow speaker, members of academia who are present here, students, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, members of the press, good evening to you all. I'm thankful to the Academy for giving me the opportunity to make a presentation at this forum. The topic I was asked to focus on was civil society and women's inclusiveness in national elections, a comparative perspective and lessons. The outline of my presentation, I'll make a few introductory remarks, take a small look at civil society and women's inclusiveness in national election issues relating to it. I'll look at selected civil society organizations advocating for women's inclusiveness in public and political life in Ghana, do a comparative perspective from other countries, and then look at some challenges and prospects and lessons for Ghana. And in my presentation, please be warned, there are a few issues that my colleague lecturer has already covered, which I may touch on, but on issues that I know she's touched on, I'm not going to go into. As we are all aware, civil society plays a very crucial role in shaping the political landscape of a country, particularly when it comes to promoting gender equality in society. And in Ghana, as in many other countries, members of civil society have played a very crucial role in advocating for gender equality as far as national elections is concerned. Our supreme law, which is the 1992 Constitution, calls for gender equality and equal representation in its Article 7. So given that women are often marginalized and underrepresented in politics and decision-making processes, many civil society organizations, particularly women's rights groups and non-governmental organizations, intentionally tailor their work to advocate for women's rights and to promote for gender equality in all areas of life. CSOs work to address the disparity by mobilizing women voters, recruiting and training women candidates, and advocating for gender-sensitive electoral laws and policies as well. So in this paper, I'll just focus more on looking at the importance of civil society in promoting women's inclusiveness in national elections in Ghana. So when we are talking about civil society, this refers to the space for collective action around shared interests, purposes, and values, generally distinct from that from governments, and that's for commercial profit actors as well. So civil society includes charities or non-profits, developmental or NGOs, community-based groups, women's organizations, faith-based organizations, professional associations, trade unions, social movements, coalitions, and advocacy groups. This is from a WHO report in 2021. In fact, there's a writer called Edward who defines the civil society arena as the arena outside of the state, the market, and the family, in which people associate to advocate, advance common interests. In Ghana, Article 21 of the 1992 Constitution guarantees freedom of association, freedom of speech, freedom of political participation and representation, and free movement of persons, goods, and services. So basically, people can join any group or association that they feel comfortable with. Civil society organizations who are also part of civil society generally. So CSOs as one of the components when we are talking about civil society. They play a very crucial role in advocating for gender equality, promoting women's political participation, and holding governments accountable for their commitments to women's rights. And the low levels of female participation in political office across the governance spectrum in Ghana has not garnered enough national attention, thus necessitating the push from civil society organizations. As you heard from the previous speaker, we've never had any president, female president in Ghana, no female vice president, and the numbers of women in parliaments have been low for a very long time. If you also look at state boards and many other institutions, you'll find out that you have more men in key decision-making positions. Currently, we have we have an affirmative action gender equality bill that is in Parliament. It has been in the works for many, many years to try to change this balance. And while women's representation in Parliament has since 1992 hovered around 15%, halfway down the UN recommended minimum threshold of 30%, which you have already heard. I had a table as well, but you had a more comprehensive table for my colleagues starting from 1951. Mine starts from 1960, where it looks at the data on women's representation. As you can see, the highest period was in 1965, when we had 18.5, almost 19% of elected candidates who were women. But they didn't get the chance to serve their full term. This was the highest we've ever had in Ghana. The lowest was in 1969, when only one woman was elected to Parliament during the Second Republic. There are several factors which account for this, most of which I think you also heard from my colleague, sociocultural biases against female leadership. We have culturally, women are not supposed to be leaders. Men leadership seems to be a preserve of men. Women are supposed to be in the private, as you heard. Religious biases. In some religions, women cannot even sit in the same room with men. They have to be somewhere else. The combative nature of electoral competition, the high cost associated with electoral competition, and the absence of legislation in the form of an affirmative action gender equality law, they've contributed to these low levels of female representation in politics. A writer called Marsden had done some research and indicated this. So we look at some conceptual framework issues. The call for temporary measures in international treaties to achieve gender parity in the public and political life necessitated advocacy for the passage of an affirmative action gender equality law by civil society organizations. And it is right to note that the justification for this bill is not only premised on international treaties, but it's also embedded in our own 1992 Constitution, which I've already mentioned, which prohibits discrimination on the basis of gender, with exception in Article 17.4. Also, as I've already mentioned, the directive principles of state policy in our 1992 Constitution under Article 35. There are several clauses which also calls on gender equality when it comes to recruitment, etc. Ghana, as we have already heard, participation, and this has been the bedrock of the advocacy for most civil society groups in Ghana. You've already heard of CEDAW, the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, which explicitly provides for the principle of equality and non-discrimination when it comes to political or public life. The CEDAW committee from time to time comes up with general recommendations, further explaining some clauses. So General Recommendation 25 came out in 2004 to try to explain it. It says that it called for temporary special measures to move towards gender equality. Because women have been so far discriminated against, it's very difficult to immediately try to push for equality. So they've called this particular convention, as explained by their committee, says that countries can put in special measures to try to bridge the gap. You've also heard again about the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action of 1995, which recognized 12 critical areas of concern to women that should be addressed by various countries in the various strategies that were set out in that document. One of the areas is women in power and decision-making, and it calls for a minimum of 30% when it comes to leadership. We've also heard again about the UN Sustainable Development Goal, particularly Goal 5, which also calls for gender equality and indicates that there should be parity by the year 2030. At the Africa level, we've also heard of a few of the conventions, but I'll just repeat them because they're already in my presentation. The optional protocol to the African Charter on Human and People's Rights, on the rights of women in Africa, which is simply called the Maputo Protocol of 2003. It also has provisions calling for equality in national elections. This is in its Article 19, and it calls for equality. The African Union, in its Agenda 2063, which you also heard, also calls for parity by the year 2063. What I always say when I'm making any presentation is, how many of us will be here by the year 2063? We'd like to see that equality much earlier, as you can see from other conventions. Then the African Charter on Democracy, Elections and Governance, also adopted in 2007, also calls for gender parity of 50% when it comes to governance. Again, these international treaties also provide for freedom of association, as I've already mentioned, and these have been ratified by Ghana. And in our constitution, Ghana is supposed to comply by conventions that it has ratified. And CSOs have held on to some of these provisions in the fight for gender equality. In addition to the above, several countries in Africa, including Rwanda, South Africa, Senegal, Guinea-Conakry, Sierra Leone, among others, have used legislation to make gender equity, towards the journey to equality in their national elections a possibility. And Ghana can also do likewise. It has also been indicated that it makes economic sense to ensure gender inclusiveness in national elections in Ghana. So I'll just look at the experience of a few selected CSOs who have been, championing advocacy for women's inclusiveness as far as elections is concerned. Gender concerns have been at the top of many CSOs' agendas with regards to national elections, partly because most issues relating to poverty and vulnerability have gender undertones. Women are not in places where they are part of decision-making, and therefore they have very little influence in decisions that affect them. Civil society recognized the need for change and began to advocate for greater representation of women in elections. Over the years, CSOs in Ghana have played a very critical role in pushing for this. One organization that I would mention is Abantu for Development, which is an NGO with a regional office in Ghana. Currently, we have a coalition. It was realized that there were several CSOs who were working towards getting an affirmative action gender equality law, and we're not making the impact that was expected. And therefore, in 2019, a number of us came together to set up the Affirmative Action Bill Coalition, and this is hosted by the Women Manifestos. Sorry, it is hosted by Abantu for Development, who also hosts the Women Manifesto Coalition. And it's done a lot of work advocating for affirmative action, particularly for legislation. It has also trained, that is Abantu, has also trained a lot of women to be equipped to engage in partisan politics under its Women in Political Training Project, which it runs with women in broadcasting with funding from the FES. It has run, I think, since about 2010. It's been running, and quite a number of the women who have been through the training are playing key roles within their political parties and in other leadership positions, and also at the local government level. Again, Abantu produced the Women's Manifesto for Ghana, which is a political document which sets out, critical issues of concern to women in Ghana, including looking at women in politics and decision-making, and it makes demands for addressing them. This was done in 2004, after a lot of consultations had taken place. This document, which was further updated in 2016, allowed women to articulate their concerns in the 2016 elections in particular and beyond. The manifesto provides females and male candidates with an agenda once they are elected to parliament. So it sets out a number of key issues: women and land, women and several other areas, including women and politics. and it gave information to women who are in key decisions, who get the opportunity to go into key decision positions to know the issues that they can continue to work on in the spaces where they find themselves in. It is also to ensure political party accountability, as they will ultimately be assessed on the basis of where they stand in relation to issues that concern women as outlined in the manifesto. That means that this manifesto gave women, during elections, etc., when they are trying to assess which party to vote for, the issues that they should be looking out for in campaign messages, etc., to guide them in their voting. Again, another group, Women in Law and Development in Africa, which is also a Pan-African Women's Rights Network, has also been advocating for women's political representation. It created a list of potential female candidates. Sometimes people will tell you, you're pushing for an affirmative action law. Once the law comes in, where are the women to fill the positions that will be created? So they did a project where they looked for potential female candidates to political decision makers, so almost like a directory of women who have qualifications and strengths in certain area to be made available to fill positions. And this was also used as an advocacy tool. It has also facilitated periodic national consultations towards the preparation of CSO's shadow reports on Ghana, and this has also been one of the ways in which Ghana's failure to abide by some of its international obligations are brought out also for purposes of advocacy. Other women's rights organizations and other CSOs like the Ghana Center for Democratic Development and the Institute for Democratic Governance, IDEG, have equally been at the forefront of advocating for gender equality in Ghana's electoral processes. Currently, the Affirmative Action Bill Coalition, of which currently I'm the convener, we are also being supported financially by CDD to enable us to do the work we are doing in pushing the Affirmative Action Gender Equality Bill forward. So these organizations have conducted training programs, workshops, and networking events to empower women to actively engage in political processes. Now we'll take a quick look at some other countries' experiences. In many countries, CSOs have successfully pushed for the adoption of gender quotas or other measures to increase women's representation in national elections. When comparing the experiences of different countries in promoting women's inclusiveness in national elections, it's clear that civil society, particularly CSOs, play a very critical role. In countries where civil society is strong and active, women have worked to create greater opportunities to participate in politics. On the other hand, in countries where civil society is weak or restricted, women's representation remains low. In one study that we looked at, they did a comparison between Sweden and I think Saudi Arabia, and indicated that in Sweden, where civil society has the hand to do a lot of things, they've gone very far in women's representation, whilst it's the opposite in a country like Saudi Arabia. Now in Rwanda, I know my colleague has said a lot, but I'll just touch on in Africa. Rwanda, currently women make up the majority of members of parliament. CSOs played a very key role in advocating for a constitutional provision that required at least 80% of parliamentary seats to be held by women. And this is in a study by the UN in 2017. In Sweden, where civil society organizations, I think I mentioned this as an example, another study indicated that when civil society is very strong, a lot is done to promote women leadership. The next example that I have is Sierra Leone. Prominent among the CSO demands in Sierra Leone then had been a call to increase women's participation of women in government. And this was led by organizations such as there's an organization called the 50-50 organization and their Women's Forum. The demand for more accountability in the extractive industries. It led to the Network Movement for Justice and Development. And they pushed, with the support of the National Democratic Institute in Sierra Leone, in collaboration with other CSOs, they advocated for the passage of the Gender Equality and Women's Empowerment Act, which was eventually passed in 2022 and assented to in 2023, and it has changed and moved them also from 14.5, as far as women in politics, women in parliament is concerned, to 30%. Then in Nigeria, Women in Nigeria is also another political interest organization aimed at transforming class and gender relations. Here too, the UNDP provided women's rights groups and other civil society. Sorry, Nigeria. It's a little difficult turning your head in there. So UNDP supported women's rights groups and other civil society organizations with training on election observation from a gender perspective in their 2015 general elections. Participants discussed methodologies for collecting gender disaggregated data and information gathering and analysis from a gender perspective during their elections. And this helped them in their analysis and in their advocacy work. Another country which has also made a lot of strides, I mean, we all know that Nigeria hasn't done very well, as we heard from my colleague, but at least the CSOs there are still working and pushing. In Senegal, an organization called the Institut Fondamental d'Afrique Noire, IFAN, is a research institute based at a university there. The Gender and Scientific Research Laboratory in IFAN was established in 2004 to conduct gender research, creating female political caucuses that promote private level and at the national level as well, to learn about their constituencies and what is expected of them in a particular specific seat. The Gender Laboratory creates an environment for female politicians to learn from research collected on how they can do more for women in their communities and countries, and aspire to be leaders, and not just subordinates or supporters of political leaders who are usually men. In Ghana, we all know the role that our women play. Most parties, the women's wing are the supporters of the men who normally are in key positions. The International Foundation for Electoral Systems, IFES, has also developed a training model on male allies for leadership equality called MALE, M-A-L-E, to sensitize women and men on the importance of working together to achieve gender equality and supporting broad coalitions to advocate for more inclusive electoral processes. The MALE model was created through focus group discussions in Syria and in Nigeria. Since then, IFES has organized male workshops in many, many countries. The reality from this research is that women cannot do it alone. If we want to get inclusiveness, get more women in key decision-making positions, particularly participating in elections and winning, we need the male counterparts to also help us. In Zimbabwe, a movement of men advocating for gender justice in Zimbabwe, known as PADERE, a men's forum in gender, it's called PADERE, has been formed. It's an organization that works with men and boys for a just society, and it serves as a platform to identify capacities and support men and boys who believe in gender equality and to mobilize and influence other men. This strategy for men and boys is one that PADERE has tried, tested, and used to mobilize a critical mass of men by targeting male political party actors, male members of parliament, male traditional and faith leaders, male students from tertiary institutions, and men in the communities. This is something we need. It looks as if a lot of the work when it comes to trying to promote women in elections and in politics in Ghana is being done by women. We would need to adopt this particular strategy to enable us to move forward. Furthermore, in Zimbabwe, still on the Zimbabwe story, the idea behind engaging men in politics and communities is to address the negative social norms that are rife in most African countries, including ours. The engagements lead to consciousness of men to the realities women candidates and aspiring ones face. Gender champions will be identified, and their male gender champions are identified, and their capacities built on how they can support women politicians and those who might want to be candidates. So men can also play a very big role in helping civil society to move our agenda. Then I'll look at some challenges and prospects and then quote some lessons from it. The first one is I believe from what we have learned and from the experience of other countries that in Ghana, we need a national civil society platform for organizations lobbying and advocating for gender equality. Through legal and policy reforms, we need one to be formed to provide a united front and pool of resources for advocacy. This proposed national civil society platform should be made up of both women's rights organizations and other NGOs, academia, religious groups, and others to join hands to work together. Secondly, Ghana needs legislation which would adopt gender quotas or other measures to increase women's representation. Currently, as I've already indicated, the Affirmative Action Bill Coalition, which has been in place, is pushing for such a law to be enacted in Ghana, and we've already heard that the bill is in Parliament. Thirdly, CSOs in Ghana should leverage their relationship with the media and academia to highlight, I don't know, in my definition of civil society, I think it was not inclusive enough, but it included academia as well as media as well. So they are all part of civil society. So what we are saying is that civil society organizations, which are groups with specific agenda who are working on things, we also need to leverage our relationship with the media and academia to highlight the issues on low female representation and similar governance challenges. Up-to-date research and documentation of stories are very essential to grow the body of literature about women's struggles and successes and the difference they make in political decision-making. Documenting and telling the stories of the struggles and successes of women in political participation and public life is important to change perceptions. Social media also plays a very crucial role. When we're talking about media, we're talking about both the traditional media as well as social media. So social media plays a very good role in the digitalization era, and civil society can take advantage of it to mount a massive campaigns calling for gender equality. That is a language that the young people know. They hardly listen to the traditional media, so it's very important that this is also resorted to. The fourth point I have is that CSOs in Ghana should intensify capacity building and ongoing support to women candidates. Advocacy and lobbying tend to happen just before elections or when resources permit. There's a need for long-term planning and resource mobilization to ensure aspiring women politicians can be supported throughout the process. Support for women candidates should not end with the election. Women politicians need support from organizations throughout the electoral process as well as when they take office. When they take office is very important. In the bill which is currently in Parliament, in our lobbying and interaction with some of the committees, you can see that a few of them are handicapped in terms of the arguments they need to make to be able to push for the passage of the law. So the Affirmative Action Bill Coalition, we put together some facts, some little documentation that we are sharing with them to enable them to be equipped with information to defend the punches that we've already heard are being made to the Affirmative Action Gender Equality Bill in Parliament. The fourth point I have is that CSOs in Ghana, I was talking about capacity building. It's very important that we build capacity and use the capacity that we have to also support those of us, the women who get the opportunity, and those who are also candidates, so that when they are on platforms, they are able to answer questions that are put at them and be able to engage in discussions. CSOs in Ghana can provide technical support on electoral reform and policy change by gathering and publishing data and reports from their grassroots engagements to key stakeholders. Again, my fifth point is that CSOs in Ghana should actively focus on gender electoral monitoring as seen in other countries. We need to reflect and take stock of what has been, what we have been doing in this area so far and identify where they can add value. I'm not aware of any group that is focusing on doing monitoring and analysis when it comes to election, focusing only on gender issues alone. I know Kodeo does a lot of work, but I don't think that that's their key focus. So we also need groups that will be looking at elections generally and analyzing things from a gender perspective. CSOs must strengthen their capacity and role in this area and raise more funding to support this process. They have to form partnerships with well-established research and advocacy organizations like the CDDs, the Ayees, and the IDEX, so that whilst they are doing general election monitoring, there's a component on why most of the females were not able to go through. We heard from the previous speaker that more and more females are aspiring to stand, but many of them face many obstacles. It needs to be documented so that lessons are learned and applied for the future. CSOs can also provide, as I said, electoral monitoring bodies, etc. And electoral monitoring bodies should be engaged in a threefold exercise. They should undertake gender audits of elections, write shadow reports, capacity building, organizing debates on post-election, so that the reason why most women fell behind or were not elected for will be analyzed and discussed to bring the issues to the public. Again, another point I have is that it's also important to realize that engaging boys and men in advocacy is a very good tool, and this can also be adopted by CSOs, deliberately adopted so that it is not only seen as a women's issue. Male parliamentarians and political leaders can become allies and powerful advocates for gender equality, contributing to open the political space for women. Already we have very few women in key positions, and sometimes they themselves have challenges. So we need male allies in high positions to also help us move. In conclusion, civil society plays a very crucial role in promoting women's inclusiveness in national elections. And in my presentation, I have tried to look at some of the challenges that they have. I've also tried to look at some of the experiences from other countries. By doing that, we can see the importance of strong and active civil society in advocating for women's rights and pushing strong and active inclusion when it comes to political participation and elections, and pushing women's reform to increase women's representation in politics. Ghana can learn from experiences from other countries and take steps to promote women's inclusiveness in national elections. For us in Ghana, one of the most important things we should be pushing for is the legislation, the policy that would ensure that there's a law in place which will compel the inclusion of women. So we have the view that the passage of the Affirmative Action Gender Equality Bill, which is currently before the House of Parliament, is the most guaranteed means of ensuring women's inclusiveness in national elections. It is necessary that this bill is passed into law before Parliament rises and before the elections. And if possible, sometimes people would say, most of the bigger parties have already done their primaries, so what's the point? The law is very broad. It doesn't only cover political positions. It covers in precedence when Ghana became a republic, so that we can get an additional number of women in parliament to ensure that women are elected into decision-making positions, particularly in parliament. By doing so, Ghana can move closer to achieving gender equality and ensuring that women have a voice in decision-making processes. The SDG sets 2030, where we should all have achieved parity. If we are 14.5% now, if something special is not done, we are not likely to even get anywhere close to the parity that the SDGs call for. So we all need to join the advocacy to push for this law to be passed. This will ensure that Ghana has a more sustainable development, because we need both men and women in key decision-making positions to take decisions that concern all of us to ensure that our development is improved. Thank you very much for listening to me.
Another round of applause for them, for the two speakers. So you have listened to the two speakers. Now we need to interact. Questions, comments, what have you. We'll take a round of 5 questions, and then we'll come back if you have additional questions. So you must first, so the requirements are: 1, you put up your hand, you identify yourself, your institution, what have you, your name, your institution, and then the question. Straight, brief, please.
Yeah, thank you very much. Good evening. My name is Akpekwa Agbevade from the Department of Political Science, University of Ghana. My question goes to the second speaker, and I want to pick her thought on the politics of civil society organizations in Ghana and women inclusiveness. The second one, still to the second speaker, there's an adage that says that he who pays the piper calls the tune. And one challenge with civil society organizations operations in Ghana has to do with funding. So my question is, to what extent has civil society organizations which are into women advocacy are able to neutralize or minimize the influence of funders on their operations as far as women inclusiveness is concerned? And then the third one, women inclusiveness or representation, one issue with it, especially in public office and for that matter politics, has to do with name calling. That any woman who aspires to a higher position, either on merit or whatever, it is perceived as if there was a sacrifice somewhere, sacrifice in quotes, in attaining that position. So as maybe people at the forefront advocating for women representation, inclusiveness, what are you doing about these things so that women can freely aspire into higher positions, both in politics and public sector management? Thank you.
Please show by hand if you have a question, so I pass the mic over to you.
Thank you. My name is Atsu, a level 300 student of University of Ghana, reading political science and philosophy. My question goes to the first speaker. This affirmative action bill we are talking about, we have tried some of the women in leadership positions and they have failed it a lot. Looking at Sheila Dampa and Adwoa as an example. And also, in another context, you can see that other countries, when you follow their sitting, countries like South Africa, Kenya, their women do contribute to the parliament to change their status code. But when you come to Ghana here, I've been following them. Aside Sergai MP or something like that, she's really active. The rest, you can see that they are sleeping. They don't do anything in parliament. So in your conclusion, in your last aspect, when you were concluding, you made mention that their voice must be heard so that we can change the narrative. But the question now is, if these people we have given them chance have failed us, is it not better for us to be sitting down than to fall, than to stand up and fall?
Thank you very much. My name is Stephen Morgan, University of Ghana. My question can be...
Okay, my name is Marjana, and my question is, there is this conception of people saying women don't support women. Is it true? and why is it like that? Thank you.
Okay, so I'll ask the speakers. Mrs.
All right. Thank you very much. The first 3 questions were directed at me. The first one, you wanted to find out about the politics of CSOs in Ghana, meaning most of them are aligned one way or the other. I think that if you're a civil society organization, in an ideal way, you're supposed to be as neutral as possible and as objective as possible in doing your work. In my experience as a CSO, I've always worked in an independent kind of way, not aligned to any party. So I believe that, yes, I'm aware that there are some CSOs that are aligned to particular parties, but when you're trying to push the gender agenda, it applies whichever party it is. I mean, it was classically known in Ghana. But most of us try to stay away from such issues because, as you already heard, there are many women in this country, very few in key leadership positions. So the funding, I believe that, for a very serious CSO, if you have a donor who is insisting that you should go in a particular way and you don't want it, you just have to either not take the money at all or, look for an alternative. I know some NGOs who some funders try to, broaden your scope in the women's rights thing that you're doing. It's a gender issue, and definition of gender is broader than you're using, and some just rejected the funding. So it's a matter of being principled and knowing what your key goal is and sticking to it and making sure that you don't get a donor who is stifling you to just promoting their view or their perspective, but you know the cause that you're pushing and to stick to it. And the third question you had was women's inclusion, the name calling, and then you indicated that women who get into leadership have to sacrifice a lot. That is very real. We live in a world in which we've been socialized in a certain way. I think my colleague mentioned it in her presentation. We're socialized, and who does even the socialization from when our children are very young? It's the same woman. It's like a chain. So the best way to do is to try to break the chain, then also free some time to enable both. So it takes all of us. It takes all of us, starting from our homes, to make a difference and to ensure that women are also able to gain the respect. And then the politics that we have, it's very rough, as she also indicated in her presentation. What can be done to take this? In the initial draft of the bill, there was a provision that anyone who insults a woman or whatever it was taken out because they said, a man too can be insulted. But we know that it's when the woman mounts the platform that she's. Women also tend to be measured by a higher barometer than men do. Okay, when a woman is standing there, if she's married, she has a problem. If she's not married, she's called a prostitute. If so many names are given to her, so why we should try to stop those things, and then to make it easier for women to aspire to leadership, and then all of us will benefit. I keep saying, go to our markets. All the big markets we have, Makola, KJTR, Techima markets. Who are the ones who are in charge there? It is the women. They have education, and they're also able to bring. We're talking about inclusiveness. We're not saying put the men back. Inclusiveness. Let them also come up.
Thank you very much. I think there was a question on, was there a question or, we've tried women a lot, but they have failed us. So what do we do? Something. I'm not sure if I got, was it a question or a comment? But then the first thing that came, my peace science gentleman, political science. The first thing that came to my mind was, have there not been men who have failed us? So also, is it just women who have failed us? So why focus on failure? And even that so-called failure must be interrogated. We need some evidence for that. I don't know if for the women, we need some evidence for that. So what I would say is that I don't think we've tried women enough. We haven't had many women in Parliament anyway. So why don't we have the affirmative action bill passed? That is when we will be able to really try women, because we have 275 seats in Parliament and just 40 women, 14.5%. They don't even make a critical, minority of 30%. That is very important. And so I think this question also, again, goes back to this notion of socialization. And what I said in my presentation, we have to be re-socialized ourselves so that we can see women, we can perceive women as capable as men, and that they are also human. They can fail as the men can fail, and they should not be held to higher standards than, as my colleague speaker said, should not be held to higher standards. They should be held to the right standards. So I think the affirmative action bill, I'm very happy it's been laid in Parliament about 2 weeks ago, and that hopefully by the end of July it will be passed. And of course, there were other recommendations that I had made. And I think maybe this can dovetail into the next question from Dr. Morgan about why are the women not voting for women? And I would say that if women are there, if the women get there, women will vote for them. And that I went through the historical trajectories. Even with the few women that ran over the years since 1951, you've had many women winners, many women runners-up, and many women also runs, those who also run. And I think that there are not enough women yet. So if there aren't women there, how can women or men vote for them? At the primary level, you have few women contesting, and even the percentages that are winning are quite good. And so what I will say is that, again, if we want to have the women there, because I think we can't say women are not voting for women. Women, just like men, vote for those who are there, who have been put, they vote along party lines, but they also vote for those candidates that have been put out there for them to vote for. And so if you have fewer women, in fact, if you take the district assembly, we didn't talk about that much here, if at all, but if you take the local elections, governance elections, it's even worse. 4.1% of women were voted into the DAs last year in the 2023 district election. So I think we need to have that legislative candidate quota. We need to have the constitutional quotas. We need to get the women there in the first place. When they run in the primaries and they win the primaries and become candidates, they will win. And then, one of my recommendations was for I think I didn't state it in detail, the reserve seats to start with. Rwanda has done that. South Africa has done it. Others are doing it. Ghana can do it. And we must do it, and now is the time. Thank you. There's somebody asked...
I think we've had an interesting session. What I want to flag is the whole issue of the inclusion of women in national elections is the collective responsibility of all of us. It must be. Issues about the legal and policy, the framework are very important, but they must be accompanied by attitudinal, behavioral changes. To, continue the policies, I don't think we have. There has been several policy discontinuity. And I think the countries which have made progress with the inclusion of women or representation of women, they have done so because of policy continuity and transformative leadership. On that note, I would like to thank all the two speakers for this interesting lecture, and also thank all of you for your contribution. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Professor Ayee, for ably steering this evening's session to a successful end, and for giving us the exciting presentations that we have just heard. Please, a round of applause for our chair. The 2024 Ghana Academy of Arts and Sciences Public Forum. Those of you who've been here, colleagues from the University of Ghana who have shown up here to support our two speakers, thank you very much. The students have been here with us since Monday. Students, you are the future. The future belongs to you. I'm glad you are here, you are listening, and you are asking questions. I hope that the exchange that we've had here, that you are going to take it away, and some among you are women, begin to think about how to support them should they decide to. Our students, thank you. And to our invited guests, thank you very much for honoring our invitation to be here with us. We very much appreciate your presence and your interaction. Everyone else that I may have missed, I want to say thank you. And last, but certainly not the least, our secretariat staff, Mrs. Kate Bwampong, Mr. McAfee, and the IT team, Augusta at the table, registration table, Mr. Mama and Charles Ansre, who have been instrumental in organizing this event. Thank you all. Also, the staff who have been here to support us, Fred, Mr. Coker, and everybody else. Thank you. There is packed food. Please join us and get a pack for yourself. Thank you. Now, please stand while the chairman and the speakers leave the room. Thank you very much.